Uh, Very good afternoon to all my law-abiding ENT colleagues. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible, ma'am. You can.
Okay. Okay, so myself, Dr. Rupali Patil Jain, I'm an ENT surgeon as well as a medico-legal consultant. Now, many factors go in the making of a healthcare system. There should be a good doctor-patient communication, good nursing staff, polite nursing staff, the good infrastructure of the hospital, the professional skills and the care of even the surgeon. But after all this, if there is absence of legal consciousness among the medical fraternity, then things can get complicated for the surgeon. Sorry, I'll just start my screen. So basic knowledge of laws related to medicine is must. Because ignorance of law is neither a excuse, it's not an excuse in the court of law. So there are many things which a medical professional should know. How to take an informed consent, how to handle death on table, how to maintain the proper documentations. There are some acts also which every doctor should know. For example, the Biomedical Safety Act, the Fire Safety Act, Biomedical Waste Act, and the Organ Transplantation Act. So there are a lot of things. So today I'm going to talk on the first and the most important, that is the informed consent. Now, why is consent such an important document? When I interact with many of my ENT colleagues, I see that there are a lot of misconceptions regarding a consent. And I don't blame them because neither the RMCI nor our Indian Medical Association has given any particular guidelines on how actually a consent form should be according to the Supreme Court guidelines. And so consent has been a very important document. Now in UK it is called as the real and valid consent, while in USA it is called as the informed consent. But in India we follow the real and valid consent, which is followed in the UK. I will explain this in detail later. Now, what exactly is a consent? When a doctor and a patient, they agree upon a treatment, they enter into a contract. Now, when this contract, both of them, they sign on some paper, then it is called as a consent. So, a consent is defined in this Indian Contract Act, Section 13. It says that when two or more persons are said to consent, when they agree upon the same thing in the same sense. So, this is the definition of a consent. Now, why should we take a consent? This was a judgment given by Justice Cardozo in 1914, in which he has said that every human being of adult years and sound mind has a right to determine what shall be done with his own body. And a surgeon who performs an operation without his patient's consent commits an assault for which he is liable in damages. So every surgeon has to take a consent. Now coming to what is a real and valid consent, which is in India. First, there are three elements to it. It should be a free consent, the party should be competent, and there should be lawful object and lawful consideration. Now, what do you mean by a free consent? Now, you cannot take consent from a patient by either by threatening him or doing any fraud. Like you cannot tell the patient that you are doing this surgery, so and so surgery, and you cannot do some another surgery. So, it is a consent is free only when it is not caused by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, mistake of fact and of law. Now the competent parties. Both the parties must be major. The patient should be above 18 years of age. If the patient is below 18 years of age, the legal guardian has to sign. Either his parents, if he's staying in a hostel, even his the principal of his school or the college or the warden of the hostel, they can also act as a legal guardian. Now there are some acts in which an individual is considered to be an adult above 12 years of age. So in such cases, I advise that when the patient is between 12 to 18 years of age, you have to take the patient's consent as well as his parents' consent. So both the consents are important. Second point, mentally sound. You cannot take the consent of a patient who is not mentally sound. Either he should be a mentally sound person or he should not be a mentally retarded person. Third and the most important point, he should not be under the effect of any intoxicated substance or anesthesia. If the patient is coming to you under the influence of alcohol, you cannot take his consent. Similarly, even if the patient, we do a lot of surgeries under local anesthesia with sedation. In such cases also, whether it might be local anesthesia, whether it is a spinal anesthesia, any anesthesia, you cannot take the consent of the patient if he's under the effect of any kind of anesthesia. Lawful consideration and object, you cannot take a consent for anything which is illegal in India. For example, euthanasia, it is illegal, so you cannot take a consent for euthanasia. Now, fourth, where is exactly this consent, where it is given? This is a very landmark judgment. I recommend everyone should read this judgment. That is a Samira Kohli versus Dr. Prabha Manchanda. This was a three-bench judgment given by three respected judges, and it was delivered on 16th January 2008. I won't go in details of this judgment, what happened in the case. I will just tell you what exactly principles have been discussed in this judgment. So the Supreme Court has given 7 principles related to the consent in this judgment. Now, what is the first principle? As I have already told you, a doctor has to seek and secure the consent of the patient before commencing any treatment. If you are doing any kind of invasive treatment on the patient, you have to take a consent. The nature of the consent should be real and valid. Now I've already told you the 3 points. That is the free consent, the capacity and competency to consent, lawful object and consideration. Now the fourth most important point is this adequate information. What adequate information should we give to the patient and what should be in the consent form? I will advise you, either you take a screenshot of this slide or just copy these points, because these 6 points are very important. These 6 points should be there in each and every consent form. First is the purpose of the treatment. That is the diagnosis of the patient. Why are you performing whatever treatment you are performing? Why are you performing? What is this diagnosis? Second is the nature and the procedure of the treatment. In brief, you have to mention what procedure, what all steps you are going to do in that procedure. Nowadays, we do endoscopic procedures, we do microscopic procedures, there are open approaches. The patient should have an idea what exactly you are going to do. For example, if you are doing a tympanoplasty, either you are doing it by the post-oral route or you are doing it by the end-oral route. There are many young females, unmarried females who come to you for treatment. You have to tell them, because some of them are very concerned about that. They don't want to disclose it to their future in-laws. So in such cases, they should know what kind of incision you are going to give them. Then the basic steps, if you are going to remove any organ, whether you are going to remove any tonsil or adenoids, whatever, you have to mention it in the consent form. Third, and again the important point, benefits and the effects of the treatment. How is the patient going to get benefited by your treatment? Whether he will be able to hear properly after the treatment, whether he will be able to breathe properly, whether his pain will reduce, whatever is there, you have to mention it in the consent form. Alternatives which many of us miss. Alternative treatment, every patient has to be told whatever alternative is there for his disease, any treatment is there available, it has to be told to the patient. For example, if you are doing a case of stapedectomy, the alternative treatment of hearing aid, it has to be told to the patient. An outline of the substantial risks. Whatever risks you might face after the surgery, it should be mentioned in the consent form. Adverse consequences of refusing treatment. Again, if the patient refuses to undergo so-and-so treatment, what adverse consequences he might face after refusing treatment. For example, if a patient with CSOM unsafe, what adverse consequences he might face if he refuses to undergo surgery. These 6 points have to be mentioned in each and every consent form. Now, coming to the risks, the Supreme Court has said that there is no need to explain theoretical or the remote risks involved. Suppose which may frighten or confuse the patient and result in refusal of consent for necessary treatment. For example, if you tell the patient that you may die on the operation table, he is never going to consent for the surgery. So whatever risks you tell, the theoretical or the remote risks should not be involved. Again, similarly, there is no need to explain the theoretical or the remote risks of refusal to take treatment, which may persuade a patient to undergo unnecessary or fanciful treatment. You should not tell him that if you don't do this treatment, you might land up in this or you might die. So a balance has to be achieved. So whatever information whichever information you give to your patient, it should be such that it is accepted by the other ENT surgeons or any other surgeons who are experienced in that particular field. So I always tell in my talks that there is a need to develop a common consent form for routine ENT surgeries by our association. Now, fourth principle. Consent for diagnostic surgery cannot be construed as a consent for performing additional or further surgical procedure. For example, you have taken, you know that a patient has a growth in the larynx. You have taken him for a direct laryngoscopy under anesthesia. You are going to take a biopsy. So if you have taken consent for only this, you can't go and do a total laryngectomy or some other procedure. You have to do only that procedure, whether it be a conservative or a radical treatment, without the specific consent for such additional or further surgery. But yes, if you feel that you might need, if you might see something, if for example, if you are going to do a direct laryngoscopy, you might see a polyp on the vocal cord and you feel that you should remove that polyp, then yes, you can tell the patient that in the same sitting, we are going to do the both the thing. You are going to do the diagnostic part as well as the operative part, but both the things, they should be mentioned in the consent form. So there can be a common consent for a diagnostic and the operative procedures. Similarly, if you think that you might need to go an additional further procedure, you might need to do a tracheostomy if you're doing some thyroid, some surgery on the larynx or anything. If you feel that you might need an additional procedure, then it has to be mentioned in the consent form, unless and until it is an emergency. Consent can be taken by an assistant doctor. Yes, there are many residents in a hospital. The consent can be taken by them also, provided they are able to explain all the 6 points which I've already told you. They should be able to explain all the alternative treatment, the procedure, the risks of the risks which the patient can suffer, everything. So a consent can be taken by an assistant doctor. Now, what are the types of consent? First is the implied consent. Now, when the patient is coming inside your chamber, he's sitting on the table, he's opening his mouth, you are doing an indirect laryngoscopy. That means he's giving permission to you for you to examine. So that means he's implying that he's ready for the examination. That is which we call as the implied consent. But as soon as if you need to do any kind of invasive procedure, you might need to remove the wax, you might need to remove a foreign body. You might need to do a direct, we do now do 70-degree scopy after xylocaine spray. You have to take an expressed consent. That means a oral consent, a written consent. Oral consent is not valid in the court of law. You have to take it in writing. This express consent is also for surgeries. Consent for refusal, it's a very important consent. There is again a landmark judgment, Dr. T.T. Thomas versus Srimati Eliza, in which the patient had come for acute pain in abdomen. He was diagnosed as acute appendicitis. The surgeon advised him appendectomy emergency, but the patient refused. He went home, he died. So the doctor was held liable that why he didn't take the consent that the patient is refusing surgery. So if a patient comes to you in an emergency, if you have told him that you need to do so and so treatment, the patient is refusing, you have to take his consent. You can take it on the OPD paper also, that the patient is, and keep a copy with you, that the patient is refused for the surgery which has been advised to him. Language. Now coming to the language, again there is a lot of controversies. Now the Supreme Court in that judgment has nowhere given that the consent should be only in a particular language. Because there are so many languages which are spoken in our country. Even in metro cities, there are so many people speaking so many languages. So it is very difficult to make a printed consent form in all the languages. So you can take a consent even in English. So, but it is important that I advise that ask the patient or the patient to write in his own language below the consent form after you have written everything in your printed consent form, that whatever has been written, that she has or he has understood whatever has written, and she is ready for the treatment without any threat or coercion or undue influence, and she is signing the consent form. At least 2 to 3 lines, because there are cases in which the patients have said that the doctor forcefully asked them to sign the consent form. So the judges, they say that yes, you can forcefully, he might ask you, but he can't ask you, no one can ask you to forcefully write 3 or 4 lines and then you are writing it and you are telling that you're ready for the treatment. So it is better to write it in the own patient's own language. Signatures. A consent form becomes valid only when because the consent, as I've told you, it's a contract. So both of the parties have to sign. We take only the patient's signature. The surgeon forgets to sign on the consent form. Even though it is with him, it is necessary that each and every consent form has to be signed by the surgeon. Not only the surgeon, but sometimes we call a neurosurgeon, we call a maxillofacial surgeon. Even they should also put their signature on the consent form. Then there should be the patient's signature and there should be signatures of 2 witnesses. Now, when should a consent form be taken? Now, as I've told you, in US, they follow the informed consent. So there they have this practice of giving a kind of disclosure to the patient, whatever disease they are suffering from, they give their disclosure. And they tell the patient about their, what his symptoms are, how he is going to get treated, whether it's medical treatment, surgical treatment, how the surgery will be, how he will be benefited after the surgery, what will be his prognosis, whatever. So when the patient goes home, he has ample of time to decide whether he really wants to undergo that treatment or not. Nowadays in India, many hospitals, many doctors are following this method of disclosure. But whenever the patient gets admitted in your hospital, at least 24 hours before, immediately on admission, first thing you do is to take his consent. Because then the patient has ample time to decide whether he really wants to undergo that surgery or not. Now coming to the video consent, till now it is not mandatory in India to take a video consent except if you are doing any medical research or if there is a case of organ transplantation, then only a video consent is necessary. Otherwise, for routine surgeries, you don't need to take a video consent. Now, what are the other contents which should be mentioned in the consent form? Some of our patients might need ICU, post-op ICU, so it has to be mentioned in the consent form. Then recently, 2 or 3 years back, there was a judgment in which the doctor had, the court had held the doctor liable because he did not have an ICU in his hospital. So our IME has asked us to mention in the consent form that even if some hospitals might have, some hospitals might not have. So just mention in your consent form that if the patient's health deteriorates or he might need to shift, there is an ICU attached in the hospital. The patient will be shifted there for further treatment. If there is no ICU, then we have a so-and-so contract with another hospital. The patient will be shifted to that particular hospital. So it has to be mentioned in the consent form. Nosocomial infections. The patient can get any kind of infection when he is admitted in your hospital. There are some patients who are non-surgical patients also who are admitted. There is a risk of nosocomial infections. It has to be mentioned. The post-op medication, the patient should know what all post-op medications he might need. The blood transfusion. If you are taking a biopsy and sending it for histopathological examination, it has to be mentioned in the consent form. Video recording. Nowadays, we record all our surgeries for scientific purposes. The patient has a right to know that whether you have video recorded his surgery or not. Now, how many consent forms? What are the types of, how many consent forms are there? Consent form for surgery, which I've already told you how it should be. Consent for anesthesia. Many doctors, many hospitals, they do not take a separate consent form for anesthesia. It is very important because the risks are different, the alternative treatment, everything is different. Many times we do a T-plasty under local anesthesia with sedation. So the patient has a right to know what kind, while conducting the surgery, while he might hear the sound of the drill. So it might be sometimes be uncomfortable for him. So beforehand, we have to tell everything that the surgery will be performed under local anesthesia. You might hear some sounds. You might have a bit of pain or something. So if the patient says that no, he's not ready for it, then he might say that you have to give him alternative treatment. That is a general anesthesia. So that's why a consent form for anesthesia should be a totally different consent form. And all the risks of anesthesia, whatever the patient has consented to, whether what are the risks of local anesthesia, what are the risks of general anesthesia, how he be intubated, everything, every procedure has to be mentioned in the anesthesia consent form. And it has to be signed by the anesthetist, the patient, and the 2 witnesses. There should be a separate consent form for blood transfusion. Even if you are admitting a patient in your hospital, sometimes we admit patients for acute epiglottitis or some abscess or some severe non-surgical things also. So you have to take a consent even for admission because there are risks of IV. We give IV drugs. There can be adverse effects of those drugs. Then high risk patient, there are some patients who have bleeding disorders, who have cardiac problems, diabetic diagnostics. So a high risk consent form should be again a different consent form. HIV testing, we all know, if the patient is transferred, will be needed to be transferred to another hospital, then again there should be a consent form for that and valuables. Now, consent relevance to COVID-19. For the OPD examination, our AOI has come out with some beautiful guidelines for all our members, and you all must have read those guidelines. In that, there is given a consent form for OPD examination. And many of us must be taking also those getting it signed from the patients. But those who are not taking it, there is no need to panic. The reason is that the government has applied the Epidemic Act and the National Disaster Management Act. In such acts, it's a state of emergency. So when the patient is coming out of his house and he's coming to your hospital, there are chances that he might get that get that infection from anywhere. So it's not necessary that the patient might get infection only from you. So I feel that even if you take or if you don't take, there is the OPD examination consent form is not so important. But yes, for IPD, now suppose if you are admitting the patient, as I've already told you, we are taking consent form in which we are mentioning about the nosocomial infections. So in nosocomial infections, now as there is an epidemic or a pandemic, you should mention it in it that when the patient will be admitted in the hospital, he might have a chance of getting contracted the virus. Now coming to the surgery, again the AOI has given all guidelines regarding if an ear patient comes, mastoid patient comes, what to do, if a larynx patient, tracheostomy, what all things to do. Now the patient should know each and everything, that if it's an emergency, sometimes what is happening, we are getting a case of unsafe CSM, but what is we are thinking that the drilling might cause a lot of virus overload. So we are trying to postpone the surgery, at least for 1 month, 2 months, we'll see. But then see, I will advise that when the patient is coming to you for examination, if you're seeing such a patient, if you're not ready to, if either you or the patient, for some reasons, he might also not be ready to do the surgery, please mention it in your OPD prescription paper that the patient is diagnosed with such and such, and the patient has been advised surgery, but the patient is not ready, or whatever things, what it has to be mentioned in the prescription paper, and take his consent from it. Now, these are some of the exceptions to informed consent. First is the medical emergency. In case of an emergency, you don't need to take a consent form. For example, the patient is coming with acute some breathing, some airway disease. And in such cases, there is no need for a consent form. Incompetent patient, as I already told you, sometimes the patient might be a minor patient, unaccompanied patient, and he's not attended with someone, or there can be an alcoholic patient. Sometimes what happens, there are some alcoholics, they will come with Abel's pin or something, but you need to do the surgery. So whoever has brought that patient, sometimes the police inspector might bring him, or some traveler who has been traveling with him, or any person who has brought that patient, try to take that patient's signature. If no one is with them, try to take the signature of any other doctor in your hospital or your nearby hospital, or any other patient who is admitted in your, any patient's consent you should take. And third is the therapeutic privilege. This privilege has been given to us by the court. In this, if you feel that after disclosing some facts to the patient, you might, there are chances that the patient might not able to bear it mentally. He is not in such a mental state that he might be able to hear that. So in such cases, you can avoid a consent, but this you have to do it with a lot of caution, because you never know when the patient might file a case against you. Now, these are some of the Indian Penal Code sections for consent: section 87, 88, 89, 92. You can find this on the net also. So I thank all the participants here, and also all the COVID warriors who have been fighting relentlessly, actively, committedly for fighting this disease. So thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for a short and excellent speech on informed consents. Ma'am, we have some queries, ma'am.
Sure.
There was one question, one query. Someone by name QCOM, he was asking you to explain the last 2 points of free consent.
Of free consent, okay. Misrepresentation and mistake of fact and of law.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, this is that sometimes, you know, the same thing. If you are taking a consent form, you have written something different in the consent form, and you are telling the patient something else. So we will call it as a misrepresentation. Same as that of, again, of mistake. Either there can be a mistake of facts and of law.
Ma'am,
Dr.
next.
Rohiwala, I saw him. He had raised his hand. Not able.
Shall I unmute him, ma'am?
Yeah, you can unmute, because he has. I saw him raising his hand. I think he wants to ask something.
Yes, sir. You can go ahead, sir. Dr. Ramesh, sir, I have unmuted you. You can ask any query if you want. Okay, ma'am. We'll go ahead.
Okay.
Next question. Meanwhile, should alternative treatments like Ayurveda, homeopathy also mentioned in consent forms?
No. We don't have any knowledge about Ayurveda and homeopathy, no. Only allopathy.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we have been trained in allopathy only, so we can't advise them about homeopathy or Ayurvedic.
And how long should the consent forms be preserved by the doctor, hospital?
Consent form should be
reserved.
So this comes in documentation. Every document, according to the law, it should be preserved at least for 3 years. And IPD for 5 years, so I will recommend it at least for 5 years. But if you feel that there can be a medical legal case against you, if the patient has died or it was an accident case, or anything has happened, any mischief has happened, then please preserve it until the case has been resolved.
While you were explaining about the consent routes of approaches of surgery, Dr. Rajiv Pachauri was asking, should we explain it in advance about the approach of ear surgery, nasal or other surgeries, that is post-oral or permeatal?
Yes. See, what is exactly a consent form? Whatever you are telling the patient, whatever message you are conveying the patient, the consent is it's a written format. So whatever you have told to the patient, it should be in the written format. That is called as a consent. So it has to be told to the patient. Whatever you have written in the consent form, it has to be told to the patient.
And there's a query about video counseling, ma'am. Is it a must for surgery?
Video consent.
Video counseling. Yeah, video consent.
No. A video consent, see, it is up to you, but it is not at all mandatory in India. It does not hold any value.
Then should we have different consent forms for different surgeries, explaining the probable treatment options and complications?
Yes, I will, because, okay, yes, sorry.
Yeah, like Mastad, one for Mastad, one for FES, in that sense.
Ideally, there should be because in one of the judgment, the court has said that there should be a separate consent form for every surgery. Because see, all the, like what I've told you, the procedure will be different, the name of the surgery will be different, the procedure, then the risks which are there, the alternative treatment, the risk, everything is going to be different. So it's better to have a separate consent form for every surgery.
Dr. Murugan is asking, should a copy of government validated ID card with signature be attached to know if the signature of the patient is genuine?
Yes, you can do that. There are now hospitals which are doing, they are taking ID of the patient, they are taking photograph, they are putting a copy of their Aadhaar card. So it's better we can do. But usually, see, what the court has said, that the consent form should be signed in front of the surgeon or your assistant doctor. So if the patient, we know, because we are operating, so we know the patient. So definitely, if he's signing in front of you, that means he has consented for that means he is the same person.
And Dr. Vidyasagar sir wants to ask you a query. I have unmuted him.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Vidyasagar.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello. Yes, sir.
It's a wonderful talk. Enjoyed as usual.
Thank you, sir.
Hi. My question is,
yes,
valid in the
sir, I'm not able to hear you.
Hello. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. This is a video consent valid in the court of law. Let's say you have a written consent, but you also have a video consent, which is explaining even more in detail. Video consent valid in the court of law?
Sir, okay, tell me what other things will be there? What, apart from the written consent, what another thing will be different in the video consent.
So when we are explaining a procedure, we will be explaining in our native language even more clearer and very detailed in the video consent or video counseling. So by chance, if certain steps which is not written in the written consent or mentioned in the video consent, is the video consent valid in the court of law or it is not?
Sir, as far as I know, video consent is not at all mandatory, first of all.
It is not mandatory.
It is not mandatory, but see what you are saying, that if you miss some point,
yes,
first importance will be given to the written consent. So there are no chances of missing any point in the written consent. So that's why I said that each and every consent form, what you do, you take, prepare a consent from each and every surgery and leave some blank lines. So because see, every patient will have something different. So fill up those lines when, if you feel that there is any special high risk for that patient. Video consent, if you want, you can take, but it is not mandatory.
No, it is not mandatory, I agree. But will it also stand court of law? Will it be valid?
No, I told you, the first will be given to informed consent. And one more thing I want to tell you, if you have committed any kind of negligence, no amount of consent is going to save you. That is also there. Even if you have taken a consent, if you are negligent in whatever treatment you have given, nothing, that is not going to save you.
Yeah. And regarding the telemedicine, what is your opinion? Is it now valid? Are we allowed to do the telemedicine?
Yes. The ICMR has given guidelines also for the telemedicine. According to that, we can. There are the webinars also have been conducted for telemedicine, so we can start telemedicines.
Okay. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, there's a question from Dr. Ajay. Does the informed consent mean that the patient should be explained in his or her own language?
Okay. See, first of all, the court has said that whatever you are telling to the patient, first you tell it in the patient's own language. Okay. Now then you're put it in on the consent form. Now if you read the judgment, that's why I said that if all of you should read that judgment, so you'll get a clearer picture. Nowhere the court has said that it should be in the patient's own language. But for our safety, if you feel that the patient does not, because see, there are so many illiterate patients also. Still there are illiterate people. We are taking their consent also. How even they can say that we didn't understand anything. So taking a consent in that patient's own language is not at all mandatory. If you feel it's for your sake, you can take it in their own language. But as I've told you, if you're taking it in English, please at least 2 or 3 lines in the patient's own language. Just write in Hindi. For example, I'm telling in Hindi कि ऊपर दी गई जानकारी मुझे मेरे अपनी भाषा में डॉक्टर ने समझाई है और मैं किसी के भी दबाव में नहीं आकर इस पर मैं अपने मर्जी से हस्ताक्षर करता या करती हूँ. So in at least 2 or 3 lines, just take, because see, there are no specific guidelines regarding to consent. Whatever guidelines I am telling you, it is because I have read some judgments, and whatever is given in that judgment, because there have been cases in which the patients have said that the doctor forced me to sign on this consent form. So that in such cases, it's advisable that at least write in the patient's own handwriting or in his patient's own language, that he has understood whatever about which is written has been explained to him in his own language, and he has understood, and he is therefore signing the consent form.
Next question, ma'am.
Okay.
Can you elaborate the last 2 points of your presentation regarding the point you made wherein the patient may file case against doctors?
I didn't get you. I didn't get you. Which point?
Dr. Jayanta has to repeat what he was asking. Then does OPD procedures like wax removal requires written consent?
Okay, yes, this is a very good question which I'm asked in every conference. See, what anything which is, if you are invading the patient's body, even a wax removal, it might cause damage to the tympanic membrane, the patient might bleed. Now the patients have become so this thing that they go for such silly reasons, they might complain about you. So it's better to write it in the patient's own handwriting, or in your, just take a consent form for a wax removal. I've prepared consent form for each and every surgery. So I have prepared even for a foreign body removal, whether it is a wax removal or a simple oral polyp, anything, any thing. You have to take up, because you're invading the patient's body. You are causing some or the other risk to the patient.
Sometimes when a patient is not in a position to give a consent, but the relatives keep on delaying to give the consent, but meanwhile the patient deteriorates. What to do in that situation?
So this is an emergency. That's what I told you. Except there are exceptions to consent. That is the medical emergencies. In such cases, you can conduct the treatment. You don't have to wait for the consent.
What is the validity of a commonly printed consent? Is it? If you print on a plain paper, is it a valid document?
Yes, it's a valid document. Even if you print on a paper, you can. It's a valid consent. For how many days are written after, once the patient has signed, till as I told you, at least 5 years you have to keep the consent forms.
Dr. Ramesh Rohiwal was asking additional precautions for a separate consent for COVID.
Yes, sir. I have already explained regarding OPD. I have told you that as there is an Epidemic Act or the National Disaster Management Act, there is no this type of consent for just for examination. It does not hold any value. But if you're admitting the patient, I feel it's better to take a consent, and it's so that he knows that he is getting admitted. He will be admitted in your hospital, and in such cases, he might contract the infection. So it applies for any nosocomial infection. Even for routine surgeries, also you have to take. He can, even by a needle prick, he might have some HIV or anything. So it's better to take a consent, even for IPD, same as for surgery.
What precautions to be taken in therapeutic consent? Doctor.
Therapeutic privilege. I will personally not advise this therapeutic privilege, because see, though the Supreme Court has given guidelines, but you never know a mental state of a patient. So you might feel that he is not, he is not capable of whatever you are telling him. He might not able to hear that thing. But in future, you never know. The patient might go in court and he will say that without my consent, the doctor operated on me. So this is a very delicate. It's just there in the law, so that's why I've mentioned that point.
Ma'am, before any such any procedure, is there any timeline wherein the consent should be signed, like just before the surgery or before a day? Is there any?
Again, this thing, it has not been mentioned in any judgment. See, what law is just a pure common sense. Whatever the guidelines come, they come after we have read all the judgments. So when we read the judgments, we come out with such guidelines. So it's better that the patient, when he comes to your hospital, immediately when he gets admitted, it's better that we take consent, and so that he has ample time to decide whether he really wants to undergo that procedure or not.
So, and what about consents in telemedicine?
Telemedicine, it's a totally different, you'll need another class for telemedicine. So if the patient is consenting for telemedicine, that is, if he has taken your appointment, that means he has consented for the treatment.
If you miss to mention something in the video consent or recorded audio consent, can it go against you?
That's why I'm saying that it does not hold anything. A written consent is much better. So it is, so see what I told you, you prepare a format, the name of the patient, his sex, age, address, the diagnosis, then coming to the procedure, what procedure aligns, then the risk, the alternative treatment, the adverse consequences, and then the signature. Finish. This is the format of a consent form. So if you put in these points, what I've told, that's why I told you just take a screenshot. If you put all those those 6 points, you're not going to miss anything.
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. Then is it required to have an independent witness's signature in consent form as in other legal contracts?
Actually, see, according to the law, the one witness should be the patient's own relative. And the second witness should be either another patient who's admitted in your hospital, or you can even take the medical superintendent's signature or any other surgeon signature, or a second witness should not be related to the patient.
Is the signature of a surgeon on the consent required?
Yes, 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 of course. I told you that then only it will become a contract. Consent is actually a contract. A contract is signed only when both the parties sign. That means the patient as well as the surgeon. So every consent form the surgeon has to sign. Not only the surgeon, I told you, even if someone is assisting you, some another surgeon, he also has to sign the consent form.
Dr. Rajesh, ma'am, he's asking if we are giving a heading of comprehensive consent, will it be okay to carry out some additional procedure on the patient? Suppose if you have planned for a septoplasty, like if you want to do a turbinectomy, it's an intraoperative decision. Can we carry out?
So why? Okay, now just tell me, why will we do a turbinectomy? First, suppose we have diagnosed the patient either through a nasal endoscopy, or we have taken the CT scan of the patient. So beforehand, we should know what exactly we are going to remove. Only if it's an emergency, then only you can remove. But you have to mention it in the consent form that you're going to remove the septum, you're going to remove the turbinates. But it's better you can add one point in that consent form that if needed, you might need to remove some additional organs if needed. So it's better if you read my consent form, I've written such points in those consent forms.
Yeah, one more question.
Can I share one of my consent form here?
Yes,
on this?
actually there's a query also. Can you share your consent forms for proper guidance?
Hello?
Someone has posted to share. Can you share your consent forms?
Yeah, just a minute. One second. I'll just share. I'll have to stop sharing this first. Why my PC is not open? It's taking time to open. But I have consent for each and every surgeries. Why is it not opening? If anyone wants to ask anything, I don't know, it's not opening.
The patient is illiterate and cannot write and sign. What do you advise?
So you have to take the witness signature. At least one person with him should be a literate person. At least if no one is there, then as I told you, the second witness, whoever there is in your hospital, the medical administrator or the superintendent or the CEO of your hospital, he also can take a consent. He can also sign the consent form. Sorry.
So, do we have to give a copy of consent to the patient, ma'am? Is it necessary?
No. You don't have to keep a copy of the patient. Consent to the patient. No.
So it's not necessary to give.
No. I don't know why today my laptop is hanging. It's not open. Nothing is opening.
I think you are in full screen, ma'am. You just can come out of the full screen. Double click somewhere.
I'm trying. I've come out of the full screen, but still I'm not able to. I don't know what has happened. Nothing is working.
What is the role of thumb impression, ma'am? Is it valid?
Yes, yes, thumb impression is valid.
Okay, then there's one more question. When patient comes to your hospital, he comes with an unwritten consent to get treatment with reasonable consequences. Even then, is it necessary to take consent for COVID epidemic so that the patient won't be able to claim that he got COVID infection from you or any of your patients? I think this is repeated.
As I told you, for OPD purpose, you don't need to take a consent form. It is not going to be valid. Even if he claims, there is no, it won't stand in the court of law. Because the epidemic has already been declared by the country, by the government. So there is an epidemic act going on. There's a disaster going on. So in such cases, it won't.
Dr. Seema Sheikh, medical tourism. In medical tourism, patient is usually accompanied by only the interpreter.
Yes.
He goes away to manage his other patients once the surgery started.
Okay.
What do you do at that situation?
In such situations, like whose consent you have to, Dr. Singham, you're asking about the consent or what? I'm not getting you.
I'll unmute him, ma'am.
Okay.
Doctor, sir, you can post your query,
sir. Hi, Rupali.
Hi, Risima.
Wonderful as always. So my point was basically that the interpreter's consent we always take along with the foreign national, but most of them sometimes are not accompanied by anybody. And what can happen is these guys disappear because they have other patients to manage. And in the event of any eventuality, this thing will go up to the embassy level because it's a foreign national.
Yes.
So how do we as Indians then get, or how can we safeguard ourselves more? That is my question, because it's a very routine thing that happens on ground zero. Add to that, I have another question. I will
You're
ask
asking this if in case any emergency occurs.
Yes, that's one. And the other thing, I'll just ask the second question, then you can mute me again. Is the event of dealing with an elderly patient who is staying in the city and all his children are, let's say, settled in the US, or they're not able to come and there are no relatives around, but he's brought in by neighbors or by somebody, and then it's very obvious that the neighbor who brought him in is again going to go back to his work, and if at all they are courteous people, there will be a lot of neighbors who will come turn by turn and pitch in. Such a case, and if the patient is not in a position to give consent, then how do we go ahead with treatment?
Okay.
It's a very common problem that happens for elderly people with children settled abroad.
Okay. So in such cases, see, you are not liable. You have, see, whatever, once the patient has admitted with you, it is completely your responsibility. Because then this is the, like, a contract has been established between the you and the patient. Either you don't take such patient, or if you're taking such patient, then it is completely your responsibility, whether the patient is accompanied by anyone or he is not accompanied by anyone. If in case, if you feel that the things are getting complicated, you can just ask your medical superintendent or the CEO of your hospital, or in worst case, you can convey it to any police station. But once you have accepted the patient, it is completely your responsibility. You have to manage the patient.
But my question is that, see, you cannot refuse a patient, right? Let's say an elderly old man is brought with severe epistaxis. You cannot refuse him. So the neighbor would have brought him to the hospital, and you're going to have to admit him, you're going to have to do something to him. Now, supposing tomorrow you need to get him to be blood transfused, or you need to take him for endoscopic cauterization or whatever, these procedures require consent. And the neighbors have come in. I'm telling you practical situations faced by my juniors, and I've had to intervene. So that's why I'm asking you this from the legal aspect. So the neighbors say, sir, we are doing this on humanitarian ground. How can we take responsibility for this surgery? If something happens, what will we do? So what we had done, I mean, this is what I had done. Now I'm asking you because you are the legal expert for this. So what we had done was we had shot out emails to the children abroad, and we had asked them to give a consent, scanned consent on the email, taken the emails, printed them and attached to the paper. But I wasn't very sure whether this is still applicable in a court of law. So is it applicable?
See, if the patient is an emergency, first of all, there is no need to consent. But yes, if the patient, they are sending it by email, it definitely will be applicable in the court of law.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Rupali.
Thank you. Still trying to open my.
Thank you for unmuting me, admin. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. For performing any surgery, is it always necessary the patient should be accompanied by someone?
It's better. It's, I mean, usually the patient are accompanied by someone. At least in India, we still don't have that problem.
So is it necessary that the accompanying person should be a very close blood relative or?
No, anyone. It can be. See, in cases the nearest relative, in cases of children, we consider the parents. If it's an adult, either his parents or the wife or his children, they are the closest relative. If they are not there, then any nearest relative who is accompanying, they can sign the consent form.
Suppose if some friend or anyone.
Yeah. Even a friend can. If there is an emergency, even the friend can sign. Even if not, he is not accompanied, you can just mention it in the consent form that the patient's relatives are not available, and so the friend is signing the consent form.
So is it valid only for emergency or even elective?
Even otherwise also. I can see one question. You can share the consent form with Dr. Shri Harsha. I'll definitely do. I don't know why my laptop is not working. It's I'm not able to open anything. Only the thing, this room which is open. Nothing. Okay. Otherwise, I would have really shared.
In incompetent consent, if any emergency surgery is done and a consent is being taken from another doctor as patient is abandoned by his relatives in the hospital and are not responding to come back, and if something goes wrong intraoperatively, who should take the responsibility?
Just can you repeat? I didn't get you. First part I didn't get.
Even I didn't understand properly, ma'am. Suppose if there's some emergency surgery which is done, the consent is taken from another doctor.
Okay.
Is abandoned by his relatives in the hospital, and they don't come back. And if something goes wrong intraoperatively, if the relatives come back in the later stage, who will be responsible? I think
no, the surgeon won't be responsible because the surgeon has done whatever he felt was important. See, what the code says that the doctor has to give a reasonable amount of skill. He has to show his reasonable amount of skill and care in every patient. So if the patient is coming in an emergency, he doesn't have to bother whether he's accompanied by anyone. He has to do what he feels best for the patient.
Yes, ma'am. I think that is the end of the queries, ma'am. If anybody wants to speak up, you can unmute yourself and ask questions. There is one more question, ma'am.
Yes,
there was once issue.
Huge issue, no?
Yeah.
I just read that was a huge issue in Hyderabad where limb lending procedure was done and hitting headlines in the newspaper. Though consent is given by a 24-year-old software engineer, the claim is that the parent's signature is not taken. The doctor's license is temporarily suspended. See, that is the problem which we doctors are facing today. Now the patients can go in the court for any silly reason. And that's why I tell that the preventive measures are very important. A proper consent, proper documentation, the documentation part is a very, very important part, because in court only your documents speak. The doctor will definitely win this case, but till then, this legal fight will go on. It will be a mental this thing for even for the doctor, he's going to have a hard time. But eventually he will win if he has not been negligent. And one more thing, you should have a very good lawyer, okay? And if in such case anything happens, ask your lawyer to consult any medical legal consultant. There are now a lot of medical legal consultants, because the lawyers, they have a limited knowledge only of law. They don't understand anything of medicine. So if you consult any medical legal consultant, so they can guide you what all like how to reply to the court and how to answer in the court. So there are good chances of you winning the case.
Dr.
I had shared my email address. I'll just share. Someone has asked here.
Ramesh Rohiwal wants to speak up something. Sir, you can go ahead. Or Dr.
Hello.
Hello, sir. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Very nice presentation, Rupali madam, as usual.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
We are trapped in a very unique situation where we are having a pressure from the government to keep our OPDs open, even to attend the patients and all. And on the other side, if a patient is found to be corona positive in an hospital, the government is closing down the hospital.
Yes.
And patients are, the relatives of the patients and the society members, they are not allowing doctors, those who are working in corona hospitals, into their residential premises. I want to ask you if a separate consent is necessary every time when a patient comes to the OPD, that he has been given an idea that he is not corona positive, or if he becomes corona positive afterwards, the hospital is not responsible. Shall we have such consent signed by the patient who is coming to the OPD, not about the surgeries I am asking?
See, sir, again I'm telling you that this consent is not going to be held valid in the court of law.
Okay.
Because as there is an epidemic act going on, and even the patient might not win this case in the court, and even if he files a case, he might have to, these cases will not be filed in district courts. In Epidemic Act or the National Disaster Management Act, he will have directly to go to the Supreme Court or the High Court, where the cases will be filed. But he won't have any chance of winning this case.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I think Zoom app has damaged my laptop. I can see Dr. Murugan's comment. I'm now scared.
It's becoming a medical consent.
Hello?
Ma'am, can you hear me, ma'am?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Is becoming a medical legal consultant a good option for a doctor who wants to retire from medical practice? How to become a medical legal consultant? Any age?
Okay, this is a very personal question. I would love to answer this. Many things. See, I first of all, I did a diploma course in medical legal sciences from Symbiosis Pune. That was in 2012. And after that, I did LLB. I felt that, see, after doing LLB related to medical, there are very few things which are taught exactly in LLB. All you have to do is you have to read a lot of judgments, and these judgments of almost one judgment is of like some are 20 pages, 50 pages. You have to thoroughly read all these judgments. There are some books also which are being written by medical legal experts. So if you want to really become a medical legal consultant, first thing is that you do an LLB. But now you have to give an entrance exam. Then you have to do, it's a full-time course. It's not a correspondence course. You have to attend the college and give exams. It's a semester-wise exams you have to give.
Can we reject?
Yes, any particular ink, blue or black, it can be used for a consent.
Can we reject treating cases based on attitude of patient or attenders in case of emergency?
Hello?
Can we reject treating cases based on attitude of the patient or attenders in case of emergencies?
No, in emergency, you can't refuse any patient. Our attitude. The only thing is that you have to make the patient stable. Once you make the patient stable, you can refer him. But you can't refuse him. Whether he's bleeding, you have to stop his bleeding or give him IV fluid. Something you have to do. And then only you can transfer the patient or shift the patient. There is no age limit for attending LLB. There was one 80-year-old person with me who was doing LLB. There is no age limit to attend college.
I think Dr. Ahila Sami sir has unmuted himself. Sir, if you
Okay.
want to speak, you can.
Hello, sir. Hello, hello. How are you?
Hello, good evening, Rupali.
Hi, sir. Hello. How are you?
Even it was a very good program.
Thank you, sir.
I was watching it even while driving the car.
Okay.
I was so tempted, and I was watching with the Bluetooth while driving the car.
Sir, yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
So, what do you want to ask? Hello.
I think he has muted, ma'am.
Okay. Okay.
Tesh Patel has unmuted himself.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am.
Hello. Hi, Dr. Hitesh. I heard you also have done LLB.
Yes, ma'am. How many times we have to store the surgical documents for how many years?
For surgical documents, you have to store it for 5 years, and OPD is for 3 years. And there's been a very interesting case. You know, as we have time, I'll just tell you. There's this Manmohan Kaur versus Fortis Hospital, Gurgaon. Yeah. So this is a very interesting case. The patient had gone for pain in abdomen. He had attended the OPD department of the surgery department. And the patient was advised colonoscopy. A consent form was taken in an OPD basis. The sister took the consent and she kept it in the OPD chamber, and the patient was taken in the minor OT where the colonoscopy was done. While doing the colonoscopy, the patient felt some pain and he told the surgeon, but the surgeon still continued and the patient landed in a perforation. So then the patient was taken in the patient was admitted, and he was taken another consent for surgery was taken, and he was taken in the operation theater. The surgeon, whatever he repaired the perforation, the patient was fine, and the patient went home. Then the patient filed a complaint against the surgeon. Now the court asked the hospital for the consent form for the colonoscopy. Now, in what had happened, the hospital had not preserved all the papers of the that patient in a together. The OPD consent form were kept in the OPD, and the surgery consent form were kept in the OT. Meanwhile, there was some flood or the heavy rains in which the OPD, all the forms or all the paper, they got destroyed, and the patient and the hospital could not produce the OPD consent form. So the doctor was not held any negligent for conducting this colonoscopy in such a manner that the patient landed in perforation, but the hospital had to pay 10 lakhs just for not producing the OPD consent form. So I advise, if the patient gets admitted in your hospital, all his papers, the consent form, the IPD, whatever the discharge, everything, all they should be kept in a same file together.
Is there any period of validity for the consent?
Validity. It's a part of a document. All the documents have to be stored, I have told you, for 5 years. And if it's a medical legal case, then till the case is resolved.
I have a question from my side, ma'am.
Yes.
Suppose I plan to operate a case tomorrow and take consent for tomorrow. And
I'm not able to hear you.
Suppose we plan for a consent for a surgery which is posted tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
By some chance, the surgery gets postponed to a week later. Then do we have to take a consent again?
Yes. You have to take a consent again. Many people do this mistake. You have to take and one more thing. If sometimes what happened, the patient is admitted in your hospital, you operate that patient. After 2 days, you feel that there is another complication, and you again need to operate that patient. So many surgeons, they don't take a consent form for the second surgery. There is a judgment. I don't remember the name, in which the Supreme Court has said that every time you perform a surgery, even if the patient is admitted in your hospital, you have to take a consent form. You have to sign the consent.
What is the role of negative consent?
Negative consent. It is very important. I told you, if the patient is not agreeing for any surgery, you have to take the consent, especially in cases of emergency. You have to take the patient's consent. If the patient is not ready to sign the consent form, at least his relatives, if the relatives are not ready to sign the consent form, whoever has brought the patient, or if, as I've told you, any other doctor, nearby doctor, even your neighbor, ask him to sign on that consent form.
Then there's one question from Dr. Lakshmi Samira. Government is asking the doctors to open clinics after the lockdown. Can this left to be the doctor's judgment when to resume their services, depending on availability of PPEs, etc.? And do the patients have legal right to demand medical services during the COVID?
Yes, the patients have right to legal right to demand medical services during COVID, and you cannot give this excuse that PPEs is not available and that's why we are not seeing patients. You have to see the patients. If you feel that you might need, at least an OPD basis, you have to see the patient. You can't refuse the patients.
How long after a surgery can a surgeon go out of the city, leaving the patient under the care of another surgeon?
Till the patient is well settled. See, once the patient is admitted with you, it is your full responsibility that the patient does not go into any kind of complication. Because if the patient goes in complication and if you are unable to treat it, that means you are negligent. So it can be even after 1 week also. Sometimes the tonsil patients, they bleed after 1 week. So in such cases, then you should have someone for, suppose if you are going out of the city, there should be some backup that someone will come and look after the patient. But till the patient gets fine, it is your responsibility. If you feel, because there are certain cases we know that this patient might be fine in 2 days. This patient, for supposing a nasal pack, we are removing nasal pack after 2 days, the patient might again bleed. So we know that at least 2 days we have to stay in the hospital, or even if we have to go out for an emergency, there should be someone who is equally capable of managing that patient. If the patient is not being managed, then you are negligent.
Then should the patient be informed beforehand about should the patient be informed beforehand about the surgeon's scheduled travel?
The patient can be informed again, sir, but it's this, I told you, even if the patient is informed and if the patient lands in an emergency, it is your liability to see that the patient is treated and he is like, so that you are not considered negligent. If anything, even if you travel, even if the patient knows, there should be someone who should be able to handle that emergency. Otherwise, you will be considered negligent. If you, last year, what at the telephonic consultation, what had happened? The patient, the doctor had gone for a conference. The patient started having fever. She had pain in abdomen. She was a case of cesarean section. The doctor, only thing was that the doctor was telling it on the phone. Only if the doctor would have advised the patient to go to some another gynecologist, the patient might have saved, and the doctor would not have been negligent. Direct section 304A, section 304 was applied to on the doctor.
What is your take on summons to the doctor for medical legal cases in the court? What precautions should we follow?
Again, see, summons, the summons, they don't come after 1 or 2 months. They will come after 1 year, 2 years. Till that time, you won't even remember the patient. You won't remember the case, nothing. In such cases, only thing which will speak is your documents. As soon as you see your documents, you will recollect everything. Or you might be at least able to tell in the court, because the court is going to ask you each and everything. The staff who has been working with you, they might have left, they might have joined some another hospital. The residents who are working you, they must have shifted to another city, they must have gone. So each and every point, there is a different, completely different 1 hour lecture on documentation also. So each and every point has to be mentioned in the documentations. Right from the patient is admitted till the patient is discharged, each and every point has to be mentioned. How the patient was managed, what surgery was done, what injectables were given, how was the chart, everything. It has to be, the notes should be there. Once the notes are with you, you will be able to recollect. So even if the court summons you, you have to go to the court and you have to tell whatever was done. How long after the procedure can a patient litigate? Yes, in consumer and the civil courts, the patient can litigate after 3 years. In criminal, there is no time period. He can file a case even after 20 years.
I
But
think
definitely, the severity of that case, it will not be so much.
we have come to the end of the questions, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, thank you once again, ma'am, for
Thank you.
the request.
Definitely, I really interacted with a lot of new people today, and I really enjoyed this discussion. Many of them I know, many of them I don't know. It was a wonderful new way of interacting with all of you.
Thank you, ma'am. With this, we
Thank
end our webinar for today. We hope
Thank
to
you.
see you again, maybe our next webinar on telemedicine soon.
Yeah, sure. Telemedicine or documentation, anything.
Yeah.
I feel documentation is more important.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
End the program now.
Thank you.